How's it going, gang? Sadly, my good camera has died on me for the 5th time, and I've already said this speech 100 times. Now, if you don't like history content, click away, I get it. Go watch one of my other videos about coronavirus or rapping. Or don't. But this is a history video. I have a wide array of content. Okay. Where's my paper? Oh, there it is. What's going on? This is more or less a dissertation via video. A video essay, you could say. A vessay. This is for my Ming Chinese history class, Journeys in Ming China. What's going on, Miss Janice? So if you don't want to watch, I completely understand, but there's some interesting history facts going on here. We're talking about the religious landscape of Ming China. So without further ado, I have produced this work with honor and integrity, and I am unaware of anyone who has not. The religious landscape of Ming China was very set in its ways, with a strong foundation in Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. It was hard for any other belief to penetrate the social and political aspects of the Ming China's beliefs. The Ming Chinese were very well known for thinking they were superior than most surrounding nations. They held their noses above the Mongols, who they referred to as barbarians. They got really angry whenever they saw a map of Ming China and it didn't have China right in the center. That's a true story. They made other nations pay tribute to them for protection. Despite them being very comfortable with the religions they had already, that did not stop Judaism, Islam, and Christianity from washing up on China's shores. Though they arrived at different times with different missions and different attitudes, it was the 3 Abrahamic religions versus the 3 teachings of China, which was Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Now, as good as this 3v3 match sounds, it honestly was never going to lean in the Abrahamic religion's favor. And here's why. First, we really need to understand what were the religions of China. The 3 teachings, that is. They were all created in the 6th century. Taoism was created by a man named Lao Tzu. That's where we get yin and yang from. Confucianism was made by a man named Confucius. He was a philosophist who had a very prescription-based way of teaching. And Buddhism came from a man known as the Buddha, who I cannot pronounce the name of. And he had an enlightenment where he learned what the afterlife was and how to live a good, moral, easy life. Now, those are gross simplifications of those teachings, but they are accurate. Now, these 3 teachings weren't just known throughout China, they were known throughout all of Asia. It was more or less the Asian 3 teachings rather than just the Chinese 3 teachings. So if they're all 3 different things, why are they known as the 3 teachings? This is because they're traditionally held together. In the 6th century, a scholar named Li Shiquan said, Buddhism is the sun, Taoism is the moon, and Confucianism is the 5 planets. Then in the 16th century, during the Ming period, Zhu Zong and Lu Xing wrote the 3 teachings. The gold cinnabar of Taoism, the relics of Buddhist figures, as well as the Confucian virtues of humanity and righteousness are basically one tradition. Now again, this doesn't mean they're the same religion or were viewed as such. They were traditionally held together. They're all one tradition. And they don't really conflict each other because Confucianism and Taoism are honestly thought of just ways of life and philosophy, while Buddhism is truly thought as the main religion. Buddhism is the main figurehead of the 3. An example of this is in the classic Journey to the West, which was written in the 16th century during the Ming period. It tells of a monkey and a monk that must journey to the West, and it's the title, in order to retrieve skulls from the Buddha and return them to the people of the East, in order to enlighten them. Now, earlier in the story, the monkey is very mischievous. He goes on to steal a lot of things from the kingdoms of heaven and the Jade Emperor who rules over it. Picks fights with a lot of protectors of heaven. Lao Tzu shows up, who is the creator of Taoism, can't even stop him. And then Buddha shows up and a tone kind of sets over the whole situation. It's kind of accepted that Buddha's taking control now. He approaches the monkey and he challenges him to jump out of his hand. That's it. Seems simple enough. So the monkey goes, yeah, I'm gonna do that. Hops in his hand and blasts off into the outer reaches of the universe. Now when he gets up there, he sees 5 pillars and he thinks, oh, I made it. This is kind of neat. And he goes and proceeds to write on one of the pillars, and then he jumps back down. And then everyone notices on Buddha's finger is written exactly what the monkey wrote down. He was in Buddha's hand the whole time. Not only does this suggest that Buddha was the only one who could solve the situation, it literally says that the universe is held in Buddha's hands. Now, this was written in the 16th century of Ming, China, and it wasn't burned or banned anywhere. So it obviously worked with a lot of people's thinking of the three teachings, that Buddhism is at the head of it. Now that we understand what those religions were, let's see what happened when the Abrahamic religions came over to China. Firstly, it was Judaism and Islam. They showed up around the same time in 600 CE, during the Tang dynasty. When the Islam showed up, they were genuinely accepted. Everyone really liked them because they would submit really well, and they wouldn't complain or argue with most things thrown at them from Chinese society. They would more or less comply. They went on to create a subculture called the Huai, which is known as the Chinese Muslim. They became so popular that even in Ming, China, a very famous pirate by the name of Wang Zi would walk onto islands and profess, "I am the king of the Huai," and he would have nice clothing and guys like color guards with the flags, and he would do this to take their money. So it's safe to say that the Huai were very well accepted into the communities of Ming, China. Judaism, on the other hand, when it arrived, it was far more abrasive. This was because they didn't comply with most traditions and rituals. Because in Judaism, to worship an idol or a false god was to denounce your faith to the one true God. Now, just because they were abrasive, it didn't mean they were exiled or punished or anything. They just were kind of like socially pushed away into their own little communities. They weren't missionaries trying to convert people, so nobody really had a grudge against them. By the 9th century, they had established themselves as really good Chinese merchants, though, and that lasted all the way into the 18th century. The only religion that really challenged the three teachings was Catholicism. And it got quite interesting. The reason things start to heat up around this time is because the Ming period aligns perfectly with when Catholics were doing conquests, specifically Spanish conquest, conquistadors. This was when Spain would go over to a region, area, or country, take it over with their military, and convert everybody to Christianity. And everyone was really happy about it. Typically didn't go over too well. The only reason China got on Spain's radar was because of a man named Francis Xavier, who was a Jesuit missionary. His last dying wish was to create a mission in China. He even said Satan was greatly disturbed at the prospect of Jesuits starting a mission there. Jesuits had a really hard time integrating into China early on and immigrating in there. So they would work around other nations until one day the Portuguese negotiated a deal to set up a trading post at one of their ports, specifically the Pearl River, which led into the ocean in the city of Macau. This was in 1557. This was the first time Jesuits really had a foothold in China. Macau, they started building churches and missions, and since it was owned primarily by the Portuguese, they were safely able to do this. Once they learned Chinese, they realized from observing Chinese culture that they couldn't go in with their traditional, "this is the God." So to make swallowing the Catholicism pill easier, they would go in with the idea that they should not tell any of the Chinese to change their ideas unless they directly affected the way you could be a Christian. Basically throwing out their European norms in order to let Chinese norms coexist with Christianity. Now, this had a really big effect. This brought a lot of people into the church from Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism, and they all started to convert. This was good and wasn't good. Specifically in 1575, with the case of a young Buddhist monk running away from his family in order to get baptized. This resulted in him getting caned and the law put into place that if you talked with the priest and practiced with the priest, you would be punished by death. This caused Christianity to lay low for a bit. People started wearing robes. If they were Catholics, they started dressing more or less like the Chinese people in order to blend in and not be persecuted. Then things start to get even more interesting when a man named Alonso Sanchez shows up in 1587. He has arrived from his first mission in China. To his country, he makes a solid argument on why the country should be conquered. He even receives a meeting with King Philip II. Now, this plan doesn't follow through, thankfully, because the British Army had destroyed the Spanish Armada in 1588, the year after he got back. This rendered the plan to conquer China a failure. Now, this had been the closest any religion had ever come to knocking out the three teachings, till a man arrived in China who was a Jesuit named Matteo Ricci. He arrived in 1600. He was a very controversial figure, but he did what was different from every other Christian before him, was he took one of the three teachings and attempted to make it cohesive with Christianity. He did this when writing a book called The True Meaning of the Lord of Heaven, where he explained Christianity was just the completion of Confucianism. He essentially did what the apostles did to the Greeks when they said to them that the God you speak of in your philosophy is the God of heaven, Christ. He looked like a Buddhist monk when he first showed up. People thought he was a Buddhist monk. Why? Because he had short hair. This was a European thing. Men grew their hair out long in Ming, China, apparently. So people refused to understand how he was not a Buddhist monk. So he kind of played into it and used this identity to stay safe. Later, one of his colleagues noticed he wasn't a Buddhist monk and he became a Confucian scholar. He started wearing robes and grew out his beard. He dressed traditionally Chinese. He was only in China for about 10 years before he died, but his legacy lives on forever, some of his work being canonized by the Catholic Church in the 1900s. But the end of him meant the end of conversion in Ming China, because only 30 years after, the Mongols, who the Ming considered barbarians, took over once again and had rule over their land, establishing Tibetan Buddhism as the main religion of the country. So Christianity could have never thrived. The conversion of Ming China to Christianity was rendered impossible, but only because of the time allotted to the Christians and the tactics they were able to use. The book Journey to the East says, so entrenched were these traditions in Chinese society that seeking to cancel them out was the equivalent to attempting to divorce the myriad of merit Christianity from the modern European society. So yes, the three traditions dominated. Yes, they could live in harmony. Catholicism, though partly consoled with Confucianism, it was never able to harmonize completely. Despite its best attempts, it could have never converted all of China. Thanks for watching my history video, guys. I'm sorry it wasn't well edited. It's due today, so it's just kind of gonna be cut up, I assume. If you liked it, leave a like. If you want to see more of this, I guess I'm gonna take more history classes. I hope you guys are all staying safe and clean during this pandemic. Stay inside, stay safe, and keep watching YouTube. Have a good day. I'll see you guys in the next one.